The small suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek looked like something out of a postcard. Rows of neatly painted houses lined the streets, their manicured lawns glowing green under the summer sun. At the heart of it all was the lake a-sparkling, jewels surrounded by towering oak trees and winding walking paths. It was supposed to be the crown jewel of the community, a place where families could gather, kids could splash around, and everyone could feel connected to nature. But in reality, the lake wasn't much of a shared paradise anymore. A big, imposing wrought iron gate now stood between the residents and the water. The gate had an electronic lock controlled by a keypad that only a select few people knew how to operate. And those select few were members of the Homeowners Association, HOA, a group notorious for its strict rules and even stricter enforcement. They claimed the gate was there to protect the lake from outsiders, but most people suspected it was just another way for the HOA to exert control over the neighborhood. That's where our story begins, with one man who decided he'd had enough. Let's call him Alex. Alex wasn't your typical suburban dad. He'd spent years serving in some of the toughest situations imaginable, working in roles that required precision, strategy, and nerves of steel. After retiring from active duty, he wanted nothing more than peace and quiet. So when he moved into Willow Creek, he figured this would be the perfect place to lay low and enjoy the simple life. But Alex quickly realized that living in Willow Creek wasn't as straightforward as he'd hoped. The HOA ran things with an iron fist, dictating everything from what color you could paint your front door to whether you were allowed to leave your trash cans out overnight. And then there was the lake. Despite being marketed as a community amenity, access to the lake was tightly controlled. Residents could only visit during certain hours, and even then, they needed permission from the HOA. If you showed up outside of those designated times, you were treated like a trespasser. Alex tried to ignore it at first. He told himself it wasn't worth the hassle. But every time he saw parents dragging their disappointed children away from the locked gate or heard complaints from neighbors about the unfair restrictions, his frustration grew. One Saturday morning, he hit his breaking point. A family of 4 mom, dad, 2 little kids was standing near the gate, looking longingly at the shimmering water beyond. The mom sighed and said, "We'll come back tomorrow, I guess." Her voice carried a mix of resignation and sadness. That's when Alex made up his mind. He went home, grabbed a pair of bolt cutters someone had given him weeks earlier, just in case. The neighbor had joked and headed back to the gate. Without hesitation, he snapped the lock open and pushed the heavy gate wide. For the first time in ages, the path to the lake was free for anyone to use. Word spread quickly among the neighbors. Within minutes, families started pouring in, laughing and chatting as they made their way toward the water. Kids kicked off their shoes and ran barefoot along the shore, while parents set up picnic blankets and fishing rods. It felt like the entire mood of the neighborhood shifted in an instant. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about this sudden change. Enter Karen, the self-proclaimed queen bee of the HOA board. She lived in one of the biggest houses in the development and took immense pride in enforcing the HOA's rules. To her, the world operated on order and structure, and anyone who disrupted that balance was public enemy number 1. When she heard about the unlocked gate, she stormed down to the lake like a force of nature. Dressed in designer yoga pants and clutching her phone like it was a weapon, she zeroed in on Alex, who was leaning casually against the gatepost, watching the happy chaos unfold. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is private property. You can't just break the rules whenever you feel like it," Alex shrugged, unfazed by her theatrics. "Funny thing about private property," he said, gesturing toward the families enjoying themselves. "It belongs to all of us. Last I checked, We're not asking for permission to breathe air or walk on grass. Why should the lake be any different? Karen glared at him, clearly irritated that he wasn't cowering under her authority. You're going to regret this, she snapped before spinning on her heel and marching off. Alex watched her go, shaking his head. He didn't doubt she'd try to retaliate. He'd dealt with people like her before, but he also knew he hadn't done anything wrong. Still, deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was brewing. And he was right. Not long after. Karen disappeared from sight. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. In her version of events, Alex wasn't just a rule breaker. He was a dangerous individual threatening public safety. Little did she know, her dramatic call to emergency services would set off a chain reaction neither she nor Alex could have anticipated. Because while Karen might have been used to getting her way through intimidation, Alex had resources and allies that she couldn't begin to comprehend. Karen's call to 911 wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction. It was a calculated move. She knew how to work the system, and she was determined to make Alex pay for what he'd done. As she paced back and forth near her car, phone pressed tightly. To her ear, she painted a vivid picture for the dispatcher on the other end of the line. "There's a man down at the lake," she said, her voice dripping with urgency. "He broke into the gate and is causing trouble. He's aggressive and refuses to leave. I'm afraid for my safety and for the safety of everyone else here." The dispatcher, trained to take such calls seriously, jotted down the details and assured Karen that officers were on their way. Within minutes, patrol cars were dispatched to Willow Creek. Back at the lake, however, life carried on as if nothing unusual was happening. Families continued to enjoy the sunshine, kids splashed in the shallow waters, and laughter echoed through the air. Alex, still standing near the gate, chatted casually with a few neighbors who had thanked him for opening it. He didn't seem worried about the consequences, at least not yet. What Karen didn't know and what no one else in the neighborhood could have guessed was that Alex wasn't your average homeowner. Beneath his calm exterior lay years of experience handling high-pressure situations. His past life as part of a specialized operations team had taught him how to think quickly, adapt to unexpected challenges, and rely on a network of trusted allies. And though he'd left that world behind, those skills hadn't faded. More importantly, neither had his connections. When Alex received a discreet text alert, a heads-up from an old buddy, monitoring local police radio traffic, he immediately understood the gravity of the situation. The message was brief but clear: PD en route, 2 units. Ada 15 minutes. It wasn't exactly surprising news, but it did mean one thing: things were about to get interesting. Without missing a beat, Alex fired off a series of encrypted messages to his team. These weren't ordinary friends. They were former colleagues, each with their own unique set of talents. Some were tech wizards capable of hacking into security systems, while others excelled at logistics or reconnaissance. Together, they formed a tight-knit unit ready to respond to any scenario. Within moments, the team sprang into action. One member hopped online and accessed the HOA security cameras, disabling the footage of the gate to ensure there wouldn't be any incriminating evidence against Alex. Another teammate parked inconspicuously near Karen's house, setting up equipment to monitor her next moves. Meanwhile, a third person coordinated with local contacts to keep tabs on the responding officer's progress. The goal was simple: intercept the situation before it spiraled out of control and maybe throw in a little creative chaos along the way. As the first patrol car pulled into view, Alex remained outwardly relaxed. He stood tall, arms crossed, watching as 2 uniformed officers stepped out of the vehicle. They approached him cautiously, hands resting on their belts but not quite reaching for their weapons. "Sir," one of them said, his tone firm but polite. "We got a report about some kind of disturbance here. Can you tell us what's going on?" Alex nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Sure thing," he replied smoothly. "I unlocked the gates so folks could enjoy the lake. This is our property, after all. We shouldn't need permission to use it." He gestured toward the families scattered around the area, many of whom were now watching the interaction with curiosity. "Does this look like a dangerous situation to you?" The officer frowned, clearly unsure how to proceed. On one hand, Alex seemed harmless enough, and the scene before them hardly screamed emergency. On the other hand, they'd been sent here based on a legitimate complaint. Before either officer could respond, though, something unexpected happened. A loudspeaker crackled to life overhead, broadcasting a robotic voice that boomed across the lake. "Attention! Unauthorized personnel detected. Please stand by for further instructions." The officers exchanged confused glances. "What the?" one muttered under his breath. The announcement repeated itself, adding to the growing sense of bewilderment. Even Karen, who had returned to the scene to gloat over her victory, looked baffled. Her face flushed red as she realized the absurdity of the situation. Who was behind this? And why did it feel like the entire day was spinning wildly out of her control? Unbeknownst to anyone except Alex and his team, the loudspeaker stunt was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. Drones equipped with audio devices hovered silently above the area, projecting pre-recorded messages designed to confuse both the officers and Curran. The idea wasn't to cause panic, but rather to introduce an element of uncertainty, a distraction that would buy Alex time to explain himself without escalating tensions. Sure enough, the tactic worked. After several minutes of listening to the mysterious announcements and scanning the skies for answers, the officers decided the situation wasn't as urgent as they'd initially thought. They issued a vague warning to Alex and the crowd, reminding everyone to follow community guidelines, then climbed back into their patrol car and drove away. As they disappeared down the road, a ripple of relief spread through the gathering. Karen, however, was far from satisfied. Standing near the gate with her arms crossed, she glared daggers at Alex. "You think this is over?" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "This isn't the last you'll hear from me." With that, she turned on her heel and marched off, leaving behind a trail of frustration and simmering anger. For Alex, the immediate threat had passed, but he knew better than to let his guard down completely. Karen wasn't the type to give up easily, and her promise of retaliation hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Still, as he watched the families return to their activities and listened to the sounds of joy filling the space around him, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. Sometimes, breaking the rules wasn't just about making a statement. It was about reclaiming what belonged to everyone in the first place. Karen wasn't the kind of person to let things slide. Her pride had taken a hit, and she wasn't about to let Alex or anyone else get away with what she saw as outright defiance. The next morning, she called an emergency meeting of the HOA board. She made sure everyone knew it was urgent, sending out emails laced with dramatic urgency. "This cannot wait. Our community is at risk." By the time the meeting rolled around, Karen had her game face on. Armed with a clipboard, a stack of papers, and a rehearsed speech, she stormed into the room ready to make Alex the villain of the hour. The board members, a mix of retirees and middle-aged professionals, sat around the table looking equal parts curious and annoyed. Most of them weren't thrilled about being dragged into yet another meeting over something as trivial as a lake gate. But Karen wasn't one to back down. She launched into her tirade without missing a beat. "This man has openly defied our rules," she declared, slamming her hand on the table for emphasis. "He broke into the gate, disrupted the peace, and put everyone's safety at risk. We can't allow this kind of behavior in our neighborhood." She went on to describe Alex as a threat, painting him as some sort of rogue troublemaker who couldn't be trusted. Her tone was theatrical, her gestures exaggerated, but she knew how to play the crowd. A few board members nodded along, agreeing that rules were rules and they needed to be enforced. Others exchanged skeptical glances, clearly unconvinced that Alex posed any real danger. One older gentleman leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Sounds like someone just got their feathers ruffled." But Karen wasn't done yet. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through photos she'd snapped at the lake the day before. "Look at this chaos," she exclaimed, holding up images of families picnicking, kids playing, and people fishing. To her, these were proof of disorder. To everyone else, they looked like ordinary scenes of suburban life. Still, Karen pressed on, insisting that Alex's actions set a dangerous precedent. "If we don't take a stand now," she warned, "we'll lose control of everything." By the end of her rant, the board reluctantly agreed to ban Alex from using the lake indefinitely. It wasn't unanimous. Some members abstained from voting, but it didn't matter. The decision was made and Karen walked out of the meeting, feeling vindicated. Or so she thought. What Karen failed to realize was that Alex wasn't the type to roll over and accept defeat. He'd spent years navigating complex situations where the stakes were far higher than a neighborhood dispute. And while he preferred to avoid conflict when possible, he also knew how to fight smart. This time, he decided to go on the offensive not with force, but with facts. Alex reached out to his team, the same group of sharp-minded individuals who had helped him handle the police situation. Together, they devised a plan to expose the truth about the HOA's inner workings. One member dug into public records, poring over financial statements and expense reports. Another hacked into the HOA's internal systems, not illegally, of course, but by exploiting loopholes and accessing information that technically should have been available to all homeowners. What they uncovered was shocking, even to Alex. It turned out that Karen and her inner circle had been mismanaging funds for years. Money earmarked for community improvements had been funneled into personal expenses. There were receipts for luxury spa treatments, first-class plane tickets, and even payments toward a brand-new sports car. The more Alex's team dug, the clearer it became. The HOA wasn't just strict, it was corrupt. Armed with this evidence, Alex prepared for his next move. The HOA had scheduled another meeting later that week to discuss community concerns, and Alex made sure he was invited. When the day arrived, he walked into the conference room carrying a laptop and a folder filled with printed documents. The board members looked surprised to see him, and Karen's eyes narrowed the moment she spotted him. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I'm here to talk about transparency," Alex replied calmly, setting up his laptop at the front of the room. Without waiting for permission, he connected it to the projector and began displaying the evidence his team had gathered. Slide after slide revealed the extent of the HOA's financial misconduct. Photos of lavish vacations, invoices for unnecessary purchases, and bank statements showing suspicious transactions flashed across the screen. The room fell silent as the board members stared in disbelief. "This is outrageous," one of them finally exclaimed, breaking the tension. Others chimed in, their voices rising in outrage. Even those who had supported Karen's vendetta against Alex now turned on her, demanding answers. Karen, caught off guard and visibly flustered, tried to defend herself, but her excuses only made her sound guiltier. "These are misunderstandings," she stammered. "I can explain everything." But no one was buying it. The tide had shifted completely, and Karen found herself isolated. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to strip her of her position and launch an independent audit of the HOA's finances. They also agreed to remove the restrictive gate policy altogether, ensuring that the lake would remain open to all residents. For Alex, the victory felt bittersweet. He hadn't set out to destroy Karen or embarrass the HOA. He simply wanted fairness. As he packed up his laptop and left the meeting, he couldn't help but reflect on how easily power could corrupt and how important it was to hold people accountable. Back at the lake, life slowly returned to normal. Families gathered freely, once again enjoying the sunshine and the water without fear of reprisal. Kids laughed as they skipped stones across the surface, and parents relaxed on picnic blankets, chatting about nothing in particular. For the first time in years, the lake truly belonged to the community. And while Alex stayed out of the spotlight, content to blend into the background, his neighbors never forgot what he'd done. To them, he wasn't just a guy who unlocked a gate. He was the person who reminded them that sometimes standing up for what's right isn't just necessary, it's worth it. Karen didn't take her fall from grace lightly. Losing her position on the HOA board was bad enough, but being exposed as corrupt in front of her peers felt like a personal attack. She'd spent years building her reputation as the woman who kept Willow Creek in line, the one everyone turned to when there was a problem, or so she liked to think. Now all that hard work seemed to crumble around her. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors, some offering awkward condolences, others outright criticizing her behavior. Even her closest allies on the board had distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone whose name had become synonymous with scandal. But Karen wasn't the type to fade quietly into the background. If anything, the humiliation only fueled her determination to strike back. She began plotting her revenge against Alex, convinced he was behind everything that had gone wrong. In her mind, Alex wasn't just a nuisance. He was the root cause of her downfall. Every time she drove past the lake and saw families enjoying themselves without restrictions, it reminded her of what she'd lost and who she blamed for it. Her first move was subtle but calculated. She started spreading rumors, whispering to anyone who would listen that Alex wasn't the hero people thought he was. "Did you know he used to work for the government?" she'd say, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "No one really knows what he did, but I hear it wasn't exactly legal." The implication hung heavy in the air, planting seeds of doubt among those who hadn't questioned Alex's motives before. At first, the gossip didn't gain much traction. Most people were too busy enjoying their newfound freedom at the lake to care about Karen's accusations. But Karen wasn't about to give up. She escalated her efforts, filing formal complaints with local authorities about Alex's involvement. In the gate incident, she claimed he had tampered with private property and violated community bylaws, hoping to drag him into court or at least force him to defend himself publicly. To her frustration, none of these attempts gained any real traction. The police had already investigated the matter and found no grounds for prosecution. Even the city council dismissed her complaints as baseless. Still, Karen refused to back down. Her obsession with taking Alex down consumed her days. She spent hours poring over old HOA documents, searching for anything she could use against him. She even hired a private investigator, though the results came back empty-handed. Despite her best efforts, Alex remained untouchable, not because he was hiding something, but because he hadn't done anything wrong. Meanwhile, life in Willow Creek continued to improve. With the restrictive gate policy gone, the lake became a hub of activity once again. Parents organized weekend picnics, kids held impromptu fishing competitions, and couples strolled along the shore hand in hand. Neighbors who had once avoided each other due to petty disagreements now struck up conversations, bonding over shared experiences. It was as if removing the gate had unlocked more than just physical access to the water. It had opened doors to a stronger sense of community. Alex for his part, kept a low profile. He didn't seek recognition for his role in exposing the HOA's corruption or reopening the lake. Instead, he focused on blending in, attending neighborhood events casually, and helping out where he could. When someone mentioned how grateful they were for the changes, he simply smiled and shrugged it off. "It's not about me," he'd say. "This place belongs to all of us." But while Alex tried to stay out of the spotlight, his actions hadn't gone unnoticed. Many residents viewed him as a quiet champion, someone who stood up for what was right even when it meant going against powerful forces. Some even joked that he should run for the HOA board himself, though Alex laughed off the suggestion every time. "Once was enough for me," he'd reply with a wink. Despite the positive changes sweeping through Willow Creek, Karen's bitterness lingered like a dark cloud. She couldn't understand why no one else seemed bothered by Alex's presence, or why they weren't rallying behind her to punish him. To her, justice hadn't been served. And so, she devised one final plan, a desperate attempt to reclaim control and restore her tarnished image. One evening, under the cover of darkness, Karen snuck down to the lake with a toolbox. Her goal was simple: reattach the electronic lock to the gate and make it look like Alex had tampered with it again. She figured if she could frame him for vandalism, she might finally win back some credibility. What she didn't count on, however, was that Alex's team was still watching. Unbeknownst to Karen, Alex's network hadn't disbanded after the initial drama died down. They remained vigilant, keeping an eye on potential threats. When cameras installed near the gate detected unusual movement late at night, the team sprang into action. One member monitored the live feed while another alerted Alex. Within minutes, Alex arrived at the scene just in time to catch Karen red-handed. "Really?" Alex said, his tone calm but laced with disbelief. Karen froze, the wrench still in her hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, realizing she'd been caught, Karen dropped the tool and straightened up, trying to muster whatever dignity she had left. "You don't understand," she snapped, her voice trembling. "I'm doing this for the good of the community. You're the problem here, not me." Alex shook his head, almost pitying her. "If this is your idea of helping the community, then maybe it's better if you step aside." He gestured toward the camera mounted discreetly nearby. "Besides, we've got this whole thing on tape. Do you really want to explain to everyone why you're sneaking around in the middle of the night?" Karen's face turned pale. Defeated, she muttered something under her breath and stormed off, leaving the toolbox behind. It was clear that her battle was over, and this time, there was no coming back. The next morning, word spread quickly about what had happened. A few neighbors joked about Karen's failed attempt to sabotage the gate, while others expressed relief that the drama was finally behind them. As for Alex, he decided it was time to let go of the situation entirely. He knew Karen would never admit defeat openly, but her influence in the neighborhood was effectively gone. With the lake fully accessible and the HOA undergoing reforms, Willow Creek entered a new chapter. People started referring to the area as the heart of the community again, a title it truly deserved. And though Alex preferred to stay out of the limelight, his quiet leadership had earned him a special place in the hearts of his neighbors. Whether they realized it or not, he had taught them an important lesson. Sometimes, standing up for what's right isn't just about winning, it's about creating a better future for everyone involved. Life in Willow Creek settled into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be true. The lake, once a source of contention and frustration, had transformed into the beating heart of the neighborhood. Families gathered regularly for weekend barbecues. Kids raced each other along the shoreline with laughter echoing across the water, and couples strolled hand in hand as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was the kind of idyllic suburban existence people dreamed about when they first moved to places like Willow Creek, and it was all thanks to one man's quiet determination. Alex, however, wasn't interested in basking in the glory. He'd never sought recognition or praise. He simply wanted fairness. To him, unlocking the gate hadn't been an act of rebellion. It had been a way to remind everyone that the lake belonged to them, not to a select few who thought they knew better. And while his actions had sparked change far beyond what he'd anticipated, he preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Instead, he focused on enjoying the simple pleasures of life. Mornings spent sipping coffee by the window, afternoons tinkering in his garage, and evenings watching the stars reflect off the lake. But even if Alex didn't seek acknowledgement, the community certainly gave it to him. Neighbors began referring to him as the guy who saved the lake, though most just called him Alex because he insisted they drop any formal titles. Kids started waving at him whenever they saw him walking. His dog and parents often stopped to thank him during their trips to the park. At first, Alex brushed off the gratitude, chalking it up to polite neighborly behavior. But over time, he realized something deeper was happening. People weren't just thanking him. They were connecting with him. Conversations that once might have been limited to small talk now turned into meaningful exchanges about life, family, and shared dreams for the future. One Saturday afternoon, as Alex sat on a bench near the lake, a young boy approached him holding a handmade card. "This is for you," the boy said shyly, thrusting the colorful piece of paper toward him before running back to his mom. Alex unfolded it to find a crayon-drawn picture of the lake surrounded by stick figures holding hands. In wobbly letters, at the bottom it read, "Thank you for letting us play here." Alex smiled, tucking the card into his pocket. It wasn't the first gesture of appreciation he'd received, but it struck a chord. For someone who had spent years operating in secrecy, living among strangers who barely noticed him, this newfound sense of belonging felt. Nice dot, of course. Not everything changed overnight. Karen still lived in the neighborhood, though she kept mostly to herself these days. Rumors occasionally surfaced about her applying for jobs in nearby towns or trying to sell her house, but nothing ever came of them. Some neighbors speculated that she was waiting for the dust to settle, hoping people would forget her role in the HOA scandal. Others believed she was too stubborn to leave, clinging to the idea that she could somehow reclaim her former status. Either way, Karen's presence became little more than background noise, a reminder of how things used to be rather than a threat to how they were now. The HOA, meanwhile, underwent significant changes. With Karen ousted and several board members replaced, the organization shifted its focus from enforcing arbitrary rules to fostering genuine community spirit. Meetings became shorter and less contentious, with decisions made collaboratively rather than dictated by a single voice. Funds previously squandered on personal luxuries were redirected toward improving common areas, including adding picnic tables near the lake and installing better lighting along the walking paths. Slowly but surely, trust between residents and the HOA began to rebuild. As summer gave way to fall, the transformation of Willow Creek became undeniable. The lake remained a central gathering spot, drawing people together regardless of age, background, or lifestyle. Halloween brought trick-or-treating parades along the lakeside path, followed by Thanksgiving potlucks where neighbors swapped recipes and stories. By the time Christmas lights twinkled in the trees, the sense of camaraderie had grown so strong that many residents joked they'd forgotten what it felt like to dislike each other. Through it all, Alex stayed true to himself. He attended holiday events casually, always happy to chat but never seeking attention. His team, though scattered across different parts of the country, checked in regularly, teasing him about his unexpected rise to local fame. Who would have thought you'd end up as a suburban legend? One of them joked during a video call. Alex laughed it off, saying, "If I'm a legend, it's only because nobody else stepped up." In truth, Alex knew better than anyone that the real heroes were the neighbors themselves. They were the ones who showed up at meetings, spoke out against injustice, and embraced change despite initial resistance. All he'd done was give them a nudge, a spark to ignite the fire that had been smoldering beneath the surface all along. On a crisp winter evening, Alex found himself sitting alone by the lake, staring at the icy reflection of the moon on the water. The air was cold, but the scene was peaceful. As he reflected on everything that had happened, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, it probably never would be, but it was better. And sometimes, better was enough. Behind him, footsteps crunched softly in the snow. Turning, he saw a couple approaching, bundled up in coats and scarves. They smiled warmly as they passed, nodding in greeting. "Thanks again for everything," the woman said, her breath visible in the frosty air. Alex nodded back, returning the smile. "Enjoy the view," he replied simply. As they walked away, hand in hand, Alex leaned back against the bench and let out a contented sigh. For years, he'd lived a life defined by chaos and conflict, constantly looking over his shoulder. Now, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about each other, he finally understood what it meant to truly belong. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than anything he'd ever accomplished in his past.